Good morning, welcome to Insiders. In the next 3 weeks, the federal government will be hoping for the biggest budget bounce in 11 years. I want to see some early signs that Tuesday's budget will start to erode Labor's 14-point lead in the opinion polls. And make no mistake, there are budgets and there are election budgets, and election budgets get the biggest bounce. To illustrate, let's take a look at last year's budget. Personal income taxes worth $36 billion over 4 years and generous changes to superannuation. The Coalition went into that budget ahead in the polls, two-party preferred, 51 to 49. And what impact did all of those tax cuts have? Well, none. In fact, negative. In the first weekend, the Coalition dipped a point, and then 2 weeks later, they dipped another 2 points. So, let's go back to 2005. $21 billion in tax cuts and $16 billion for the Future Fund. Again, the Coalition went into that budget with a lead, 52 to 48. And again, the weekend after the budget, they dropped a point, but then recovered marginally 2 weeks later. Net result, a modest 2-point turnaround in the polls. Now, 2004, an election year. Stand by for the budget bounce. The government brought down the biggest spending budget in history, $14 billion in tax cuts, but then the real barbecue stopper, $19 billion in family assistance, a $600 lump sum, cash in hand, $600 for every child, and more cash, $3,000 for every new baby.
We brought together so many things. This is the biggest package ever. Increased amounts, different income thresholds, different tapers, maternity allowance. We have in there additional childcare places. This is nothing as big as this has been done.
Now, the Coalition went into that budget trailing Labor 48 to 52. And the first weekend's poll after the budget dripped with voter cynicism. The Coalition actually lost ground.
This is also about the budget, about the election. Let me hear you say that, because that's what the audience would believe. To some degree, this is about the election.
Well, this is about good economic policy. Now, do I think good economic policy will help in the election? Of course I do.
Now, your budget speech tonight is peppered with the word family. Do you know how many times you mentioned families in your last budget speech? Once, in the last sentence of the whole speech.
You sound a bit disappointed that it's so beneficial to families. I think a lot of families will be very happy.
So, cynicism initially, then 2 weeks later, look at the poll. The Coalition shot to a 53-47 lead. That was a 10-point turnaround in just 3 weeks. And keep in mind, Labor's lead right now is 14 points. So expect families to pepper the speech again on Tuesday night. Our program guest this morning is Labor's Shadow Treasurer Wayne Swan, and the panel will take us through the changing industrial relations landscape. While Kevin Rudd was trying to find a way to calm the bosses, John Howard offered a gesture to the workers. And Bill Heffernan, is he a fit and proper person to represent the Prime Minister on the New South Wales Liberal Party executive? That's coming up, but first, the latest news headlines overnight. It's Good Morning, Katrina Blowers.
Thanks, Barry. Good morning. Families are expected to receive up to $8,000 per child in a one-off election year bonus to help cover the costs of childcare. The initiative, to be announced in the federal budget, means families will be able to claim their childcare expenses when they incur the costs instead of waiting until tax time. Labor says it wants to look at the fine print.
Is this about building, or is it about bribing? Is this about investing for our nation's future, or is it about securing John Howard's political future? It's all a bit late in the cycle for these kind of things. We'll support it if it's got merit, but we want to look at the fine print first.
Taking childcare rebates out of the tax system means lower income families will also be able to access the benefit. An air search has so far failed to find a Kenyan Airways plane thought to have crashed in southern Cameroon with 114 people on board. Friends and relatives are waiting anxiously for news of their loved ones. Air traffic control lost contact with the Nairobi-bound airliner shortly after it took off. A tornado has killed at least 9 people and wiped out most of a small farming town in southwestern Kansas. More than 60 people were injured when the tornado struck the town of Greensburg, destroying a hospital, schools and homes. The town has been evacuated and emergency workers are still searching for anyone trapped in the rubble. And Barry, I'll have more news at 11 o'clock.
Well, the Treasurer, Peter Costello, will bring down his 12th budget on Tuesday night. They're all important, but in an election year, there is more than the usual anxiety hanging over both the content and the reaction to it. Anxiety on both sides. Our studio guest this morning is Shadow Treasurer Wayne Swan. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Barry. Great to be here.
Well, all the talk is of a $15 billion surplus this financial year. Is that as you understand it? Will that be the Treasurer's starting point?
Oh, there's no doubt that the Treasurer is rolling in money. There's also no doubt that he intends to use this budget to spend his way back into power, rather than facing the very big challenges facing the nation. The challenges of creating, say, a world-class education and training system, or the challenges of lifting productivity and putting in place modern infrastructure through broadband. And of course there's tackling climate change.
But as the Treasurer says, spending's okay, provided you don't borrow to do it, and he won't be borrowing.
Well, look, the government's two most senior economic advisors, Treasury Secretary Henry, and of course you've got the Reserve Bank itself, both have warned that going on a spending spree will risk interest rate rises into next year. So we do need a disciplined budget, and when it comes to spending, it's not just the amount of the spending, but it's also the quality of the spending. And certainly in this budget, spending ought to be directed towards enhancing workplace participation, putting some incentive in the tax system for those people that work harder, and really looking towards the future rather than bribes. I mean, we need a budget here, Barry, which builds the nation, not bribes it.
But spending's one aspect of it. He's also going to put downward pressure on interest rates, he says, and he's going to do that by adding to savings. You add to savings, you put downward pressure on interest rates.
Well, Barry, we'll judge it on its merits on the night, but we know what Ken Henry has said, and Ken Henry has said that an expansionary budget in an economy which is at its capacity risks interest rate rises and risks serious inflationary pressures. That's the warning from the Treasury Secretary, but we'll have a look and we'll judge it on its merits on the night.
Well, the government is obviously going to go the way of childcare rebates and childcare benefits. Today in the Murdoch press, this is talking of the talk of an $8,000 family gift. It seems to be taking rebates out of the tax system. Is that how it works?
Well, this is so Peter Costello. The average payment, by the way, through this rebate is $800. This was first promised prior to the 2004 election, and after the 2004 election, Peter Costello came along and said it's a 30% rebate, but everybody has to wait 18 months until they see a cent of the money. So people have been denied their rebates and have therefore been under tremendous financial pressure as a consequence. Now he's going to come along just before this election and promise to bring the rebate forward. So all he's going to do is pay them the same amount of money that he always owed them, but he had denied them because of his broken promise back in 2004.
Well, whatever, they'll get the money and they'll get it just before an election.
Yes, they certainly will, but I think a lot of parents out there will be looking for some improvement across the board in the affordability of childcare and in the supply of childcare. And from what I've seen today, there is no additional money in the stories that are out there in the press this morning. All he's going to do is bring forward, if you like, a payment that he denied them, and denied them for well over 12 months.
It's not a bad headline from their point of view, though, $8,000.
Well, you know, it is so much Peter Costello. There's plenty of sweeteners, it looks like, but of course, after the fact, there's probably a stomachache out there as well.
So if you judge that the government does overstretch, that it overspends, will you specifically identify those areas and oppose those measures?
No, we won't necessarily do that. We'll judge these on their merit, Barry. The most important thing we can do is put forward a disciplined economic framework, and what we've said is we must keep the budget in surplus over the cycle, and that when it comes to taxation, it should not be increased as a percentage of GDP, and most importantly, when it comes to changing spending priorities, we will rearrange the budget to meet our new priorities. That's our commitment.
So you're going to try and have it both ways. You'll be critical of these family rebates, but you certainly won't criticise the increases.
Well, we'll call it as we see it, Barry. We'll call it and we'll judge it on the quality of the initiative. As I said before, it's just not the size of the surplus, but it's also the quality of the spending.
And because you had your fingers burnt back in 2005 when you opposed tax cuts, then you're a little bit gun-shy on this?
No, that's not the case. The government actually adopted our policy in the last budget. Barry, you just mentioned tax cuts. Half of the taxpayers that got tax cuts in last year's budget are still waiting for some or part of those tax cuts. So there's plenty of people out there who have been let down by Peter Costello yet again.
So where should the cuts be made this time around?
Where should the tax cuts be made this time again? They should be directed to enhancing workforce participation. We run some of the worst work incentives in the Western world when it comes to second income earners, particularly women. So certainly initiatives there would be welcome.
But how do you do that? Where do you cut the taxes so that it has that impact?
Well, it's the intersection of the income taxation system and the family payment system. So people that are working, second income earners working a couple of additional hours are paying 60, 70 cents in every additional dollar they earn. That's the area where there should be reform to enhance workforce participation, particularly at a time when when we've got very serious skill shortages out there.
On industrial relations now, and you couldn't have been comfortable with the presentation this week that your party's in conflict with business. As Kevin Rudd says, they're the engine room of the economy.
Well, they certainly are, and we will talk with business about the implementation and transition positions that we've got out there in these proposals. We're happy to talk to them, and we will continue to talk to them. At the end of the day, we won't agree on every aspect of our industrial relations system, our modern flexible system, but we'll keep talking, and we're certainly going to involve them in a discussion about transition and implementation.
AWAs, and particularly as they apply to the mining industry, is a small part of the whole equation. How did you allow that to sort of define the whole package?
Well, it shouldn't define the whole package, but we're happy to talk to the mining industry and others about transition and implementation in that area, and we will work at that over the next few weeks.
So it's time for a bit of pragmatism.
No, it's important to actually resolve those transition and implementation issues. We recognised at the time that this was a serious issue. We've been talking to business about it, and we will continue to talk to business about it.
Kevin Rudd says he'll rip up work choices, and still that's the bottom line, I guess. But that in itself is misleading, isn't it? Because you can't rip up work choices unless you have the consent of the Senate.
Well, we'll take our proposals to the Parliament following the election, and we'll work our way through all of those issues. But we will fight for our program in the Parliament, through the House of Representatives and into the Senate. It's always been like that.
But the reality is, though, you'll need the support of the third parties. Andrew Murray from the Democrats has a different view on work choices than the Labor Party. So does Steve Fielding. They don't like work choices, but they have a different view than Labor. So you'll in the end, you'll need to do a bit of horse trading, won't you, with the Senate?
Well, we'll meet that challenge when we come to it, Barry. The most important thing that we have to do is to get rid of John Howard, and we're going to put forward our program for a fair and flexible industrial relations system, and I believe it's got very considerable support out there in the community, as you can see from the changed position of the Prime Minister this week.
The advertising campaign now that is already underway, do you accept that the government does have a responsibility to explain the changes? What really matters is the tone and the nature of those advertisements.
Barry, it's outrageous. What John Howard is doing is putting his hand in the pockets of the workers that he's already ripping off through his industrial relations system and forcing them to pay for Liberal Party propaganda. He might as well take a great fire hose down to the Treasury and suck the money out and give it to the advertising companies. It is outrageous and not justifiable at all.
On climate change now, and you're hiring Ross Garnaut to take a look at the situation as well. He gave the analogy with the protection debate and said that in fact, overall, jobs lost can be made up for new jobs gained. Do you accept that as you apply your climate change policy, that there could be a net gain in jobs?
There's no doubt there is great economic opportunity if we tackle climate change soon, and we tackle it absolutely comprehensively. You see, the cost of inaction here is far greater than the cost of action. That's the conclusion of the Stern report, and here Garnaut is going to lead an expert team to do this analysis specifically for Australia. But there's great economic opportunity in Australia tackling climate change comprehensively.
But it seems to be looking at the whole issue with rose-coloured glasses to say that you can tackle this thing without any job losses, without any net job losses.
Well, there's no doubt that over time that jobs will be rearranged amongst industries. But there are great opportunities, for example, in the coal industry through clean coal technology. We will continue to be a very big exporter of coal to the world, and if we become world leading in clean coal technology, then we'll enhance the prospects for our coal industry in the world.
Can you do it without the price of electricity going up, without the price of petrol going up?
Well, there'll certainly be price impacts, which is why we need an emissions trading system.
Prices will go up?
Well, certainly in some areas prices will go up.
With electricity?
Well, there has been various modelling done out there, but you'd have to go and talk to the private sector agencies. That's why we need the Garnaut report, to look at all of these things in the Australian context.
Could the price of electricity double?
The price of electricity can increase, there's no doubt about that, but there have been various studies which show that impact will not necessarily be large. But that's why we need a report from someone like Ross Garnaut, marshalling the expertise of state treasuries and so on, to get a comprehensive evaluation of the impact of climate change economically in this country. But the one thing we do know is the cost of inaction is far greater than the cost of action.
I sort of suspected, listening to Peter Costello during the week, that the Liberal Party will be running ads during the election campaign saying that the price of electricity will double under Labor.
Oh, well, what would you expect? They would say that. It would be absolutely inaccurate. You see, this is a Treasurer who has not mentioned climate change once in 11 budgets. This is one of the most significant economic challenges this country faces into the future. And the only way to protect jobs and prosperity into the future is to deal with it. And the longer we delay, the more costly it becomes for the nation.
Pre-selections now within the Labor Party seem to be settled now in New South Wales. Have you got any sympathy for Kelly Hoare in Charlton, who had to rearrange her affairs to make way for Greg Combat?
Well, it's a very distressing time for Kelly and her family. You feel particularly sorry for the families in these situations. Pre-selections are always difficult, but I think it's fair to say we are committed to putting forward a talented and experienced team for this election, and we're doing that.
And is there any embarrassment in Labor ranks about this morning's story in the Telegraph that suggested she propositioned a Comcar driver? If that is true, of course, that amounts to sexual harassment.
Well, I don't know whether the story is accurate, but it's it's sad and it's very distressing for Kelly and her family. She's lost a pre-selection. I think we ought to move on.
What's really strange about this, though, that this leak should happen now, it sort of has that feel of payback about it, that because she refused to leave without making a fuss.
Oh, look, I don't think there'll be anybody in the Labor Party associated with this story today. If that's the insinuation that in your question, I don't think so at all.
On the other side of politics, Christopher Pyne, the aged care minister, has reported in the Age that he told a Liberal Party breakfast that he preferred to avoid aged care functions because he's young. Should he lose that portfolio?
Absolutely. I mean, Christopher Pyne is the modern face of the Liberal Party, and if you read those comments this morning, you just see how selfish his attitude is and his lack of appreciation of the importance of his portfolio and the contribution that older Australians have made to building this country.
He might have been joking, of course.
He could have been, but anybody with any experience and anyone who's in touch and anyone with any empathy wouldn't joke like that.
The Prime Minister said recently, does anybody really think that Wayne Swan could be a better treasurer than Peter Costello? Now, I think that's going to be a theme. Are you ready for it?
Absolutely. Peter Costello likes to rabbit on about his experience, but his experience has been to go on spending sprees in 2001 and 2004. When he became Treasurer, he had less experience in the Parliament than I had.
But you're not making a case against a novice Treasurer, you're making a case against somebody who's now bringing down 12 budgets.
No, but I'm making a case against a Treasurer who's brought down 12 budgets and not prepared this country for prosperity beyond the mining boom. And that negligence, I think, is a very significant factor in this election.
Thanks for your time this morning.
Good to talk to you.
When the budget's on, I'm going to be listening. I'm not going to be glued to it. When Peter Costello stands up there, I really hope he's aiming at middle income earners, the families. The high income earners had their turn last time, it's our turn this time. Yeah. Looking at tax cuts and thinking about how people are struggling in the middle income area.
As a first time voter, I would like a focus more on health.
Hope he's had a good look at his budget and decides that there are a lot of aged people these days living at home and don't all want to go into aged homes as such, but have the help brought here.
They've got so much money to spend. Let's hope they cut some tax and spend more money on some services. The boom's on now and a lot of people need help.
You've got to remember that it's a juggling act, you know. They can't spend all and leave his coffers empty.
I think the budget will definitely, focus on climate change.
Of course, I'm older and I'm not struggling to get the homes and put children through school. We've got to think about the water.
With the money around though, let's hope that's one thing they can do is keep the interest rates down. I think that's a big thing for families. They're going to be waiting to see what's going to happen. Really, the money that's available in the budget to spend on families and tax cuts are more important than the IR laws.
Oh my goodness me, wouldn't it be wonderful to have that much money?
So much money. 3 generations of a Perth family there, and Karen Middleton, you do get the takeout from that, I think, is that they're onto this fact. They know there's a lot of money around and expectations are high as a result.
Massively high. I mean, the trouble with pulling a rabbit out of a hat all the time is that one rabbit is now never enough. You've got to have many rabbits. You look at the list they just ran off there. We had health, we had aged care, we had climate change, water, tax cuts. They want money for everything.
And also they don't want too much spent.
That's right.
Yes. They're all going to be pleased, I think, on Tuesday night. They're not going to be pleased. They're all going to be, all those areas will be covered. No one will be pleased.
And imagine having that much money. Well, it is your money, actually, that they have. That's what they're distributing.
Well, you could sense it a little bit from what Wayne Swan's saying, that already they're doing what they did the last election and saying, don't spend too much, they'll ruin it, it's the biggest spending. Remember all that, how all that spending by the Howard government was going to wreck the economy? Well, we've seen what happened.
And there is nervousness about interest rates in that regard and inflation, so they have to balance that very carefully. They have to look like they're being extremely generous without provoking a rise in inflation.
But the thing is, of course, the coalition needs a circuit breaker. And they've half got it with this IR kerfuffle of Labor.
Well, if this $15 billion plus isn't a circuit breaker, they can go heave.
And do you agree with it? If you look back to 2004, the emphasis was on family payments, that people sort of expect tax cuts because they know they've paid taxes all this time, but when they get the cash in hand, the family payment, that has an impact.
Look, I think you're right. What people will be expecting is the tax breaks. I don't think that's going to be a bounce. That's just going to give us our due, and the breakthrough has to come, I think, in things that actually deliver cash in hand or as sort of feel-good projects involving childcare or something like that.
Or health. What was it, Joanne, who said they had theirs last time, now it's our turn this time.
Yeah, that's true.
There's a big sense of that.
Andrew, and
that's absolutely true too.
I know you won't think this is feel-good, but there'll be climate change all over this budget.
That'll make you...
It'll make you feel very good.
What a waste of money. What a waste of money.
OK, we'll get some background and analysis now from Paul Kelly, political commentator with Australian. Paul, good morning. Before we go on, here's the Prime Minister with the news-breaking political story of the week.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Mr Hockey and I have called this news conference to announce a change to the workplace relations legislation which will introduce a stronger safety net for Australian workers.
To deal, by the way, Paul, with a perception, it's a fairly significant change to deal with a perception.
It certainly is a significant change, Barry. I've got no doubt at all that this is a very important change in policy terms. In effect, what John Howard is doing here is that he's imposing a no disadvantage test for workers below $75,000 a year, moving from the award system to either individual contracts or to collective agreements. And this is all driven by the successful ACTU campaign led by Graeme Cornes over the last couple of years. John Howard's real aim here is to try and blunt the sharp end of this campaign. Now, the sharp end of the campaign is all about people being left worse off as a result of trading away penalty rates or overtime or annual leave loadings and so on. And Howard wants to ensure that he eliminates this risk, he cuts out this danger, so that he can go to the election campaign presenting himself once again as the workers' friend, as the battler's friend.
Well, this sort of reversal, he's done that before. It's become a bit of a mantra, really. It's worked before as well. Do you think it'll work this time around?
I've got no doubt at all, Barry, that this change will help John Howard politically. Whether it's enough or not, of course, nobody knows. It's far too early to tell. But there's an important tactical judgment John Howard has made here, and that is that he wants to get work choices out of the way before the election campaign proper. And his worst nightmare, his worst fear was that he'd get into the election campaign and find over the last couple of weeks of that campaign, the ACTU would wage a ferocious campaign on television exploiting the penalty rates and overtime issue, and that Howard would be overwhelmed by this and his government, in fact, would be destroyed by it. So that's what he's been concerned about. That's what he wants to counter. And essentially what he's doing is he wants to separate the fairness issue from the issue of trade union power. He wants to neutralise fairness so he can concentrate on trade union power. He's trying to redefine the politics of work choices so that the government, if you like, looks moderate and Labor looks the extremist party. That's essentially what he's on about here, what he's trying to do.
Well, you talk about Labor being the extremist party. Kevin Rudd had his own problems during the week, the other end of the spectrum, I suppose. Take us through his week.
Certainly Kevin Rudd's worst week so far as Labor leader, Barry. And it all stemmed, of course, from the industrial relations policy issued last weekend. I think this policy was a political miscalculation on the part of Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard. I said that on this program last Sunday. I think the emphasis was far too much on collective power, on trade union power, on looking after the trade unions. And of course, this conflicted with the messages Kevin Rudd had previously been giving about business, his pro-business rhetoric. Both small business and large business were very upset by the policy, but worse than that, it undermined Labor's economic credentials. So Rudd engaged in a series of consultations this week with business. He said this was always his intention. And the really interesting feature, of course, is what comes next for Labor as a result of this process, which Rudd says will be a business consultation over weeks and months ahead.
Yeah, I suspect that Kevin Rudd is smart enough to know the reality of most of what you've just said. So what do you think he will do?
This is the big question. I think it's a really interesting question. I think Kevin Rudd has learnt a lot from his mistakes over the last week. He's a young leader. Young leaders have always got to make mistakes. He's done that. And the interesting thing will be the conclusion he draws. Now, what's the evidence so far? Well, the evidence is pretty clear. First of all, he is chairing these consultations with business. Rudd is in charge. Julia Gillard is not in charge. He's not delegating this issue anymore to Julia Gillard. Secondly, Rudd's on about the detail, particularly at the Brisbane meeting. And he understands clearly here that IR policy is all about detail, and he is getting right into the detail. And I think the final and big point here is that the fact that John Howard has changed IR policy means that it's easier for Kevin Rudd to make a substantial policy change. Now, don't be surprised if, while he talks about refining the detail, at the end of the day we get something more important, some sort of more substantive change. Now, there's been no decision about that. All I'm saying is don't be surprised if it happens. I think the fact that Howard's been flexible on work choices means that Kevin Rudd himself is under more pressure now to be flexible.
Paul Kelly, thanks for your time. And that's interesting, isn't it, that Paul's suggesting flexibility. If the Prime Minister can be flexible, so can I. I wonder though, whether you saw Sean Carney's article in the Age during the week on Saturday when he wrote about double standards. He said IR for the government is a political problem. For Labor, it's a policy problem, and it impacts on their economic credibility. Are there double standards?
Well, it's both, isn't it? I mean, it is a policy problem. I'm a bit intrigued about the policy tangle they've got themselves into on AWAs in particular. Because before Kevin Rudd was leader, when Kim Beazley was leader and Stephen Smith was IR spokesman, they were on the record as saying there would be provision for flexibility upwards, particularly for the mining industry. So they've sort of retreated from that, have almost got themselves in more of a tangle, and the policy that was quite clear initially is now not clear.
It's now about collective bargaining, isn't it? They are completely committed to collective bargaining, and they've given in to the unions on that, and essentially there's nowhere, I can't see how there's anywhere he can go on that end of the market without getting the unions offside.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, Howard has got a freedom to be flexible that I think is denied Rudd. One, because Rudd is not cemented in place as Howard is and is as dominant, but second, Rudd's deputy, Julia Gillard, is the author of this, and she believes in this policy, and he's got Greg Compay coming on board
Upsetting
as
the
well.
unions won't be bad.
This is a real problem.
Rudd could do it. He could still do it, but if they're committed to collective...
Not upsetting his own side.
That's but I think the key to it, Andrew, is that Julia is the deputy and Kevin Rudd is the leader, and I think he would be prepared to take a bit of flack from the trade unions.
That was a staggering admission in that interview that you did with him last week, where he kind of just, he said, "Oh, well, I'm over the broad." He wasn't over the details. What was his word?
Not anymore. You just heard from Paul Kelly that he's decided to...
How do you get to that point where this has been a huge... It's not like we're coming in after a week saying, "Oh, isn't this a shock?" We knew this was going to be it's a seminal test for them.
He did that.
And how do you not get involved in the detail?
At the press club as well, when he was asked, "Well, who in the unions did you consult?" "I don't really know. Julia's dealing with that. It's up to Julia. Julia's been doing it."
I tell you what.
He's good when he gets across the detail, but he made a mistake here. He let this get away. He left it to Julia, and she's mucked it up.
And as you said, he's rectified it, or at least Paul Kelly suggests he's rectified that. And he will now be chairing the meeting.
You do have to ask, though, this line about the perception of workplace, and I think that's true. Anecdotally, you ask people and they're worried about their kids in the future. But if work choices if it's a dog, it's still a dog. If the P76, you can put the seat covers on it and new tyres. But if people don't like it, I don't know if they're going to like it much more.
Before you go on, just on that then, let's have a look at how the rationale behind the changes, according to the Prime Minister.
I mean, people have said to me that they are not themselves worse off. They don't know people who are, but they are concerned in this area surrounding penalty rates and overtime payments.
So obviously some people are being adversely affected.
Not necessarily.
So maybe nobody's being adversely affected, but we'll make the changes anyway.
Look, either these laws were unfair. He's been saying all along they were fair, and he's now conceding they were unfair. Or he's being disingenuous. He doesn't think they're unfair. He's only doing this to be politically expedient.
I don't think he does think it was unfair. I don't think he was... and look, if they were so unfair, the ACTU would have put up a hell of a lot of case histories by now. We'd see they're unfair. They haven't.
That doesn't
What
leave
it
him
is
looking
is
very
for one-
flash, does it?
What it is for one reason only, to give John Howard a line in the election to say the poor won't be worse off. That's all it's about.
And it takes the sting out of some of the ACTU's ads.
Precisely. It's
But
just
he's not
it's a
saying the
political
poor
cover.
won't be worse off. He's saying, I can't guarantee no one will be worse off.
Essentially what he's saying is you can't be forced onto a contract that leaves you worse off.
But doesn't it then leave it open for the Labor Party to say, well, Kevin Rudd was right all along. He went too far.
He's prepared to have that argument if it just draws attention to the fact that he's now put in these, is listening. I mean, don't forget, the attack on Howard only recently was through these polls that he's stopped listening. And I think this is going to take some
I don't know that it is just about the listening thing. It was in 2001 with petrol excise. That was a gesture. That disappeared. You know, we all knew that was going to disappear. The benefit was going to disappear the minute prices went up again. I think this is about more than just the gesture. I think they want to be persuaded this change is going to stay there. And this is where he has a credibility problem.
Now, on that score, listen to Julia Gillard as she debates Tony Abbott on the Today Show. She picks up on that point.
So if it's so good, why are you softening? Why are you so-called softening?
Well, we're simply going back to one aspect of the pre-work choices position, which worked very well before then, and we think, given the scare campaign that Labor's whipped up...
so it is the politics.
Let's just try to ensure that no one is anxious that they are going to be ripped off, and that's why this fairness test is there.
Very cute manoeuvre, Tony, but we know the story today is the Howard government out there trying to sell some window dressing for its laws. It is window dressing. It will be gone after the next election. This is clever politics from a very clever politician.
That was your point, that there might be a feeling in the electorate that he'll reverse this after the next election.
Business doesn't... Well, sections of business certainly don't like what he says he's going to do. Will he accede to their pressure after the election and return it to how it is?
I doubt it too, but it's a fair argument given that he didn't pronounce it before the election. Work choices was invented after the election.
I like how Tony Abbott says it was working well before. Why did you change it?
And this all goes back to that famous Nick Minchin speech that he gave when he didn't know there was a tape recorder, when he said, talking about the future. But he also said that day, and this is long before, he said, people violently disagree with what we're doing. And this is 18 months ago. And I don't think... I wonder if that's changed. I wonder if what's happened over this week has changed that.
But I think, what's happened here, this is one of the things that Julia Gillard really has to bear so much responsibility for. Not only has she mucked up her own policy, but she's allowed Howard to do a backflip like that, that's at a timing that makes him look like he's responsive and that he's the moderate and they're the extremists. It's allowed him to do a backflip that in isolation he'd be getting so much heat for, and now it's just seen as part of the political process.
It also means that if you were a voter looking at, well, I'm worried about the disadvantage in this system, your only option was to vote Labor. Now it isn't. Now you have the option to vote for the government if that was your issue.
I think it's even more than that, Karen. I really think now that IR is an argument that the government is only too pleased to have now.
It's now much more about collective bargaining.
It was something that was going to hurt them. Now they're bring it on, they're saying.
Because and it's dual scare campaigns, isn't it? At the one end it was that all your kids will be paid $4 an hour, which is now much less likely. Give Howard his due. Under these changes, he's made that scare campaign harder.
Right.
The other scare campaign, and this, if you look at what Labor's presented, is that there'll be a union in every workplace because they're so committed to collective bargaining. Now, Rudd has got to close off that. The scare campaign will still go off at this end, but he's got to close off that because at the moment he's way open to that argument. Under their policy, they're so sort of locked into collective bargaining.
On that, there's one issue that I'm surprised that hasn't really taken off, the bargaining fee issue, that the unions can now demand a bargaining fee, and that bargaining fee is of non-union members, and that fee, by the way, is over and above the annual fee for union subscriptions.
It's taken off. I'm in Perth the last week. It's taken off, where a lot of people on AWAs. This is a huge issue, and there's unions over there are saying, well, we'll be taking $500, $600 a week off. We don't want these freeloaders getting in on our. This is a huge issue, and these are, and I tell you what's happening in the West at the moment. You wait, they're stockpiling. I know the government, they're stockpiling a whole lot of quotes that'll be used in the election campaign.
It hasn't taken off as much as it should yet. only because there's so many different issues running. But when people realise, non-unionists realise, this law will make it possible, as some union leaders are already promising, to rip them off.
I think that's what Rudd will do.
And the thing is, this Dean Mile has actually said that's exactly what it's going to do. That's the branch secretary of the Electrical Trades Union. Now, Dean Mile has been with the ALP. He was a Green, is now back with the ALP. You must think he's with the Liberals now, announcing the worst of this legislation.
I think he'll close that off.
After non-unionists.
I think that prediction that this bargaining fees will be a big issue and that Rudd will
How did it get in there?
It got in there because of the ALP policy.
Well, let's put it in perspective. Wouldn't the unions have a right to demand something for their work? Because if they represent these non-union members, the non-union members are getting the benefit of their work, so they should be able to charge them something.
Well, a lot of people have been paying union fees and are a bit cranky that they don't get much for their union fees already. So, there'll be...
put that to a non-unionist, that a union they don't want to be part of, and some really don't want to be part of, is going to come after them and grab their cash.
Okay, I reckon there's a bit of a hook too in John Howard's proposal, just the same, and that is there's no retrospectivity about that, and so those who have already signed on to AWAs, the low-income earners, will not get the benefit of this.
That's true, and there are also loopholes in what he's suggesting. I mean, on the face of it, he's saying, oh, well, you won't be able to, or there'll be protections if you want to trade this for this. But there's a test for that, and the test is a little bit, nebulous. What's going to constitute fair compensation?
You know what the test is, Karen?
The fact that your office is
It's the vibe of the thing.
Well, it can be that the fact that your workplace is in a nice part of town, or there are a whole lot of other elements that are kind of not quantifiable.
The big thing in the government,
it's a bit dodgy.
But that's how stupid. That's essentially it's stupid. And let's not forget what the price of this guarantee now is, and it'd be the same with what Labor's promising. By guaranteeing it could be more expensive for employers to hire people at the bottom of, just starting work, they'll essentially price people out of a job.
Although
that's what's happening. People are going to lose their job as a result.
The Australian Industry Group was the one group that came out and said, actually, we don't really have too much of a problem with what the Prime Minister's proposing. It's not going to put that much of an extra burden.
A lot of business extra burden, but it is a burden, and anyone who right now thinks that their job is not secure if they're going to be made more expensive to hire, they should think this is not a very good idea.
Okay, I just want to move on now. A Morgan poll released on Friday had the coalition, or the Labor Party on 61, the coalition 39.
We can't laugh at the Morgan poll anymore. We're not allowed to laugh at it.
Okay, but it was consistent with News Limited last time around, by the way. But that was before the Howard backflip, before Rudd stumbled on AR, and certainly before the budget. So if there is a budget bounce, a significant budget bounce, is an August election out of the question?
No, I don't think it's out of the question at all. I think that neutralising this industrial relations issue, or the attempt to at this time, is significant. This change takes effect from Monday, immediately. They want this out there. They want people aware that this change is in place. They want it out there before the budget so that people stop being anxious about IR and can focus on the nice things in the budget. If there are handouts in the budget, they'll take effect from the 1st of July. I would think that an August election is still on the cards, provided they get a positive response to both
I don't
this
think
move
so.
and
I don't think
the
so.
budget.
Matt, is it in the mix? No.
Well, it's in the mix. He's not going to rule it out, but he'll go in October. He wants to be here for APEC, and
he doesn't like to be boxed in, though, and he's losing his opportunities.
Well, I just can't see it.
You're
going to tell me 61% is going to go down to 50 in 2 months? I don't think it will.
I'm not saying it will happen. I'm saying he will watch those polls, and if he sees an opportunity, if he's within striking distance after this circuit breaker,
of course, except for two things. One is he doesn't like, Howard does not like seeming to go early, seeming to panic.
It's 2 months before a full term.
A lead on day one of an election can disappear by week 4.
That's true.
And second, I think with Matt, that Rudd's lead is so big so far, it'll take a long time to pin back.
This is going to be the judgment. Does going longer allow Rudd to cement himself, or does it destabilise him? And that's going to be the big question.
I think Rudd's going to have more problems as he goes on.
Yep, I agree with you, Andrew, on that score. Bill Heffernan, I wonder what role he will play in the election campaign.
Well, he's played a big role. We all sit here and talk IR. In 3 months' time, what people will remember from this week is that comment.
I had people coming up to me, out and about in the last few days saying, what about that Heffernan comment? Buying coffee, shopping, people, what about Heffernan? They paid attention to that remark.
Well, he did apologise, sort of. Here he is.
I do come from a farm at Junie in New South Wales. I am Australia's most disgraced senator. I would like to sincerely apologise to Julia Gillard and anyone else who I've offended by some inappropriate and insensitive remarks in the recent past, and I apologise to all the people that's offended. So there you go.
Now, there's a letter in one of the newspapers that said, call that an apology. There were probably more letters on this than any other topic in a long time, and I'll take you through a couple of them. One in the Sydney Morning Herald. What a pity Bill Heffernan's mum didn't decide to be a full-time politician. Another one in the Australian. How many Liberal women voters unable to have children for medical or other reasons are now reconsidering their vote? And in The Age, few people are aware that John Howard's favourite movie is Kill Bill. Now, he's not going to kill Bill, but I wonder, though, whether he should at least wound him by taking him off the New South Wales executive.
If these views do not represent John Howard's views, why does he represent John Howard?
They don't represent. His views don't represent John Howard's views.
Well, then what?
They don't. That's silly.
But Bill Heffernan does represent John Howard on the New South Wales executive.
How can he represent him if he's not representing his views?
The problem for Howard is that...
Matt, you're saying there shouldn't be pressure on the Prime Minister on that score?
There's huge... I don't think what Heffernan says about Julia Gillard has anything to do with what the Prime Minister's thoughts about Julia Gillard are. What I do think is that once that
wasn't the question.
Go back.
It's not
the
about
question was, should he be under pressure?
Of course he should be under pressure to leave the Senate. He should be under pressure to leave the Senate because Santo Santoro, the big problem was that once you can have one breach, but once he'd done the 60 or 70, you can't sit in the Senate and then have the government attacking the character and value of Labor. Now, while Heffernan is there with a half apology, and we all know Heffernan, he's a rascal, but he's got into big trouble with that. And what are Labor going to do when this issue comes up?
It's such a stupid thing for Heffernan to have done, because in a sense it's just a remark that's got no policy bearing, affects no one. It's got nothing to do with except what Bill Heffernan happens to think.
But
some backbencher. It's so stupid.
And he's sitting there saying, I'm the most disgraced
The thing is,
senator.
you can't have a time bomb sitting on your own backbenches ready to blow you up just when you're looking like you're ahead.
The Prime Minister's response was equally stupid. When he was first asked about this, he said, well, people say funny things. Bill's a mate of mine. I happen to be have a traditional marriage and children, thereby kicking it on just a little. And if Julia wants an apology, well, she can ask for one. And you know what changed it? Two things. It kicked along on Talkback Radio, so it was connecting with people.
And with the media.
And then Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd came out and said, the thing that John Howard fears most, this is a government that's mired in the past. Views of the past.
Well, that's true.
And suddenly he went, oh no, that's the political message I'm trying to combat. I'll demand an apology from a man who's not sincere.
Context. One is that's utterly consistent with John Howard's character from the Pauline Hanson thing on, that he hates this pile-on mentality that's in the media and everywhere about, someone said something wrong, let's all pile on and really pulverise them. He wants people to be able to speak. And second part of the context is Heffernan actually said this last year. Actually said this last year, and it's been dragged out again. It disappeared last year. You weren't jumping up and down.
Before you go on, I'm sorry, Matt. We've got a lot of ground to cover. We need to move on. Christopher Pyne now, the Aged Care Minister, has said that at a Liberal Party breakfast that he really doesn't like going to aged care functions because he's young. Is he in trouble?
Yes. That was a stupid thing to say for someone who has just finally got into the ministry after so long, to sound that cocky. Now, we don't know the context of this.
It's a stupid thing to have alleged to have said.
That's right. We don't know the context.
No,
you don't
know,
that's
and
quite
I
true.
don't know, and we need to see the transcript.
If
and
he did say it, it's very stupid.
This is a very strong chance of being a complete misreporting. Let's see the transcript and then let's form.
Well,
probably, that's a fair point.
Yeah, fair point. So let's move on now to Labor Party pre-selections. They seem to have sorted it out in New South Wales in one form or another. Kelly Hoare, of course, having to make way for Graeme Cornes, and this was her initial response to that.
I've got a daughter at university and a son on a first-year apprenticeship wages, and if we lose this income, we lose our house. It's a very disgraceful situation.
Now, it seems to me she's got 6 months' notice to go out and, she's hardly unemployable, you would think. Perhaps the person who offered the best advice to Kelly Hoare was, I think, 10 years ago now, maybe 12 years ago, Paul Keating.
I hope that's not our only Keating insert today. I haven't seen the rundown.
It's a fair point.
But surely that's it, isn't it?
Well, it's not a free job, and there's a small matter of the fact that the voters actually get to choose who has the job.
No, they don't. The ALP gets to choose.
And that's what this highlights.
Listen, Kelly Hoare is one of the least respected politicians in the Labor Party.
And
she's
now,
been a
given
deadwood.
the
There's no
revelation
sympathy
this morning that she apparently propositioned a Comcar driver.
Well, it's disgraceful for someone in Labor, and it clearly was someone in Labor, to drop that as a payback.
Hang on, let's go back to your previous one. How do you don't know?
We don't know
you
that.
don't know. You
Would
don't
have
know
been
that.
the Liberals.
And I tell you what, I reckon if
now hang on, Andrew. To be consistent here, it's probably best to take the same approach that we took with the Christopher Pyne story.
We don't know if it's true.
I stand by my hunch is that someone in Labor.
So a hunch is okay on this.
No, I'm advertising as a hunch, not a fact.
Do you reckon
Is it your hunch that Christopher Pyne said what he's reported to us?
My hunch is that Christopher Pyne might, if he said it was joking, but it looks awful. My hunch is that if every politician that had ever propositioned anyone in the Parliament was dragged in the front page, there wouldn't be many left. And it's more than a hunch. The reason that Charlton was up for grabs is because Kelly Hall wasn't well regarded by anybody in caucus.
And they needed a spot for Greg
And
Combay.
they needed a spot for Greg Combay, who, bless his soul, has finally, after a tortuous route, has now got the job.
But let's examine Combay's thing here and Labor thing. Combay and Labor think that here's someone that's not up to the job. They've got a better candidate in mind. They sack one, they parachute the other one.
That's good.
Now, if Kelly Hall was not a member of Parliament, but on an AWA, and had been sacked, she wouldn't be making way for an ACTU president. She'd be starring in an ACTU ad of the iniquities of...
Let's talk more generally, though, about what the Labor Party has done by handing all this over to the National Executive and by going out there and aggressively recruiting. Gary Gray, Maxine McHugh, Bill Shorten, Greg Combay, Bob Davis, a couple of mayors thrown in there, a couple of ex-army officers.
Good
Net
stuff.
result, you would think they've improved their standing.
Yep.
Although there are also sort of three people with international human rights lawyers and people with diplomatic experience, the same sort of people that Kevin Rudd might think are quite valuable. So maybe it isn't just the National Executive.
Just add to the
on that,
Nichole Cornes.
Belinda Neal gets another go in Robertson. Is that fresh thinking?
Well, it was interesting. When Kevin Rudd came into the National Conference, the one person that he walked over and kissed behind his family or shook hands with or something was Belinda Neal, which I thought was quite interesting, married to John Della Bosco.
Has the irony of the Warren Mundine situation occurred to anybody that Julia Irwin hangs on in Fowler because Warren Mundine made the judgment that affirmative action had to take precedence? The one opportunity for the Labor Party to get its first Aboriginal into the Parliament, and he stands aside because of affirmative action.
Precisely. This just shows how stupid affirmative action is.
Do we believe that?
It depends
Do we
which
believe
group.
that?
No, I don't know.
I have a hunch that...
Do we believe what?
It's a hunch.
Do we believe that that's the reason that he stood aside for that? I just think
Well,
there
you've
might
got to
be
treat him.
more behind
That's what
that.
he said.
Yeah,
That's what
and
he
he's
said.
pretty honest. Maybe that's true.
But
It's
the
true,
point
but
is,
it's bloody stupid.
Which one of us thinks that Julia Irwin is a better candidate than Warren Mundine?
Well,
silence.
Okay, speaking of candidates, let's move on now to the seat of Boothby in South Australia. The candidate is Nichole Cornes.
I hope you've got an insert here.
We have. She was chosen, I think, on the Thursday or the Friday. She then flew to Sydney for a photograph with Kevin Rudd and then sent back to South Australia to cope on her own, and this was the result.
Well, I have voted for John Howard, but I do feel it's time for a change. I'm happy to support Kevin Rudd, and I think it's a fresh change, and I'm happy to support him.
The uranium nuclear debate?
Well, now South Australia, we can prosper from that policy being lifted and
what
changing.
What is the ALP's policy now on uranium?
Well, we can have more mines. We can have more uranium mines to mine the substance and to create more jobs. It'll give people in the electorate of Boothby an opportunity to earn some more money. Okay, this is all really new to me. I've really got to get my head around all of the policies in a more in-depth, in a more in-depth way before I can really make an educated comment on that.
She does newspaper columnists. Great credit. That was her job, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's just so incredible. I mean, the thing is, Labor didn't want her. Labor wanted her husband, Graeme Cornes. He wasn't available and is a Greens voter anyway. Well, so they go for the wife.
Maybe
who's a Liberal voter. I mean, what is this?
Here's Kevin Rudd's defence of that performance at her first news conference.
When I was doing my first press conferences, let me tell you, they weren't entirely flash. That's just life. And also, I understand there's been some criticism from my dear friend and colleague Alexander Downer this morning. I'd ask you to reflect on Alex's performance at various press conferences over the years as well. They haven't all been absolutely flash.
I have no recollection of my first media conference, but I suspect it was a very smooth, well-conducted and professional operation.
Can I it is a little bit like seeing the sausages being made, because if you went to do it on election campaigns, when you occasionally put the mic in front of the candidates, and they're all boned up, then
come on, Matt,
she's worse
stop
than
excuses.
No,
guys.
I'm just saying that a lot of candidates are overwhelmed.
All right,
by
let me
coverage.
ask you another question.
It was shocking.
Let me ask you another question. Can you see Nichole Cornes, this glamour candidate, ever being in charge of a ministry?
Oh,
No,
who
but I
knows?
tell you
That's
what,
not the
it's
point.
not-
Most
it's not-
members of Parliament are not.
She just has to win a seat.
test.
She just has to win a seat.
I don't
Also,
think she'll even do
if the swing is on, and it seems to be on in South Australia and Queensland, she could win Boothby, and what's more, her stepson Chad Cornes would win the Brownlow medal. So we shouldn't
That is
laugh.
a rare
They may
double.
have a big,
That is a
big
rare
year.
double, and a great segue to your other show.
Kevin
Fantastic.
Rudd left her hanging out there by herself.
She shouldn't need a
No,
handheld.
she shouldn't. But they shouldn't have done that to her.
Yeah.
And she was standing
What do you
beside
expect,
him.
Karen?
She was
This
standing.
is someone who wasn't even in politics until 2 days before the press conference.
And that's what I mean. They've selected the wrong person.
Well,
she
that's
was
my
standing
point.
beside him when he said that she hadn't been all that flash. Well, I mean, you know.
Look, a bit of prepping.
Yeah, a little
needed.
bit of a hand. If you're going to
No,
choose someone who's
They
ill-prepared.
needed someone who wasn't so obviously just chosen because of the looks and association to someone more famous than she.
And having done that, they should have then given her a hand. and they
Okay, Karen Middleton, Matt Price and Andrew Bolt will be back in a few minutes, but time now for Mike Bowers and his regular segment, Talking Pictures.
I'm Michael Bowers and I'm pictorial editor with the Sydney Morning Herald. I'm talking pictures this morning with cartoonist for The Australian, Lindsay Foyle. Welcome to the program, Lindsay.
Good morning.
Look, politics can be a bit of a blood sport, and the sporting analogies were flowing thick and fast with Julia Gillard and dropping the ball and scoring 9 goal with her IR policy. How did you read it?
Oh, I think she made a dreadful error of judgment, but she's very lucky. She's got a guardian angel out there named Bill Heffernan. Came in and did the rescue job.
Absolutely did the rescue. We'll talk about that in a sec. Paul Zanetti did the old Charlie Brown analogy with Charlie and Lucy, and of course Charlie's looking a bit like Kevin Rudd here. I thought that was quite good, but he actually needed a bit of an apology to Charlie Brown here, didn't he?
Yeah, he should have put it, but Paul up there on the Gold Coast probably sunning himself. Didn't think to put that in.
Bill Leake called it the softening up period. Psst, pull yourself together, Kevin. It's not a game for girls. Run us through this cartoon of yours. I was very pleased to see you've upgraded the old TV to a plasma and the surround sound here.
Got a good deal. Well, there was a letter in the paper suggesting that Rudd looked like an AFL umpire, and the cartoon was based on that, pointing out that, basically that he can't be the umpire because he wants to pick the team and kick the winning goal.
As you alluded, Julia Gillard was sort of saved by the bill, so to speak, with Senator Heffernan, he's been described this week as the shake-a-lally of federal politics, which I thought was rather fitting.
Yeah, so he hasn't got a good reputation.
Well, you've got to say that once the spear is actually thrown, it's pretty hard to withdraw the thing.
Oh, yeah, but you can apologise for the blood on the end of it.
This is a Mark Knight from the Herald Sun in Melbourne. Is this A, the mining industry tipping a bucket on Julia Gillard, B, upset Labor MPs tipping a bucket on Julia Gillard, C, Bill Heffernan tipping a bucket on Julia Gillard, or D, all of the above?
Mark Knight is terrific, and he really has a way of pulling everything together, and he doesn't do it once, he doesn't do it twice, he does it every bloody week.
This is a Wilcox from the Herald. She should have children. If she did have them, she shouldn't be pursuing a career in politics. She should be at home looking after them. Julia Gillard is a barren, neglectful mother.
Yeah.
Poor woman can't seem to win.
Kathy's always good. A couple of children of her own, so she understands the
Kathy
position.
understands it very well. Lindsay, the thing that was notably absent from the ALP conference was Mark Latham, but the Chaser boys helped out there, giving the ghost of Latham.
The ghost of Mark Latham was just beautiful. He just wafting around in the background there.
He even came complete with man boobs painted onto him, which were very expertly done, I thought.
Yeah, I think the only thing they missed out on is not issuing broken arms to all the people that he was haunting.
Well, it's been a great pleasure talking to you this morning. Thanks very much for taking the time, Lindsay.
Thank you.
And the former Environment Minister before Malcolm Turnbull, Ian Campbell, Senator Ian Campbell from the West, has announced that he's leaving. Initially I thought, this will be a dummy spit, but in fact, in the end, he left with a bit of class.
Very gracious. You wonder what has been offered, but no, very gracious. That was good. but he left with more class than he actually performed his duties.
So kind. He's quit twice happily. Like when he got sprung with Brian Burke, he was smiling and saying, "Oh, I'm quitting." Now listen. I think there's a few personal issues there, and good luck to him. He's had 17
He
years.
will be remembered as the great protector of the orange-bellied parrot.
And there'll be no one else remembered as that.
It's funny. He'll be remembered for that, which was silly. But I think what he shouldn't be forgiven for within the Liberal Party is his inability to diffuse this global warming mania before it was too late. Global warming mania that's so strong that it's sort of swept the tidal wave over the
It's so strong that Peter Costello will be all over it on the weekend.
Right. Believe me, you're at the cusp of a fall in this global warming.
Well, one's not going to fall till after the election, Andrew, I think.
There was
that's true.
The third United Nations report, Andrew. The headline was, "It won't cost the Earth to save the planet."
We're all going to die. This is very interesting about again, there was mention made by Wayne Swan about the Stern report. Now, Labor has appointed a Ross Garnaut to do his own Stern report.
Yes.
Now, Labor is treating the Stern report, which says exactly what you just said, it's cheaper to do something now than wait, as gospel. Ross Garnaut says deeply flawed. They're relying on a report that is deeply flawed, and their own climate change advisor says the same.
Ross Garnaut is saying that, as I pointed out in the interview with Wayne Swan, is that you can actually restructure and not have a net loss of jobs in the same way that they did during the protection period.
We'll see. But this is the thing. Labor is committing itself to a 60% cut in emissions. It doesn't know how much it'll cost. It doesn't know the effect on jobs, and it's appointed a guy to suss all that out, but he won't report until after the election. I think the whole thing is a gigantic con. But anyway, you all believe it?
It's not about what we believe, Andrew. It's what the public believes. And
your
that's fine. You can
believe it.
You can go. You can kick against the wind. You can kick against the wind. But the political reality is that a huge majority of the public are worried about climate change. They want their politicians. You can sit there. Well, fine. We can sit here and talk about
it. Matt, is it true or not true that since 1998 the globe has not warmed? Is that not true?
I don't know.
But
I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert. What I believe is
it's very simple.
But it's easy for you to sit here and
it's a simple measure. Has it or
how are you
depends where you look.
The Hadley Centre, by all the measurements through the Hadley Centre, for example.
I think there are other reports that would suggest that it has, and that a mere 2% warming will wipe out vast areas.
Not true.
But what is true, though, Andrew, is that look out for a scare campaign on both sides. The electorate is going to be misled mightily on both sides. On the one hand, you're going to have Liberal Party ads saying that your power bill is going to double under Labor and fuel excise will be increased and whatever. On the other hand, you'll have Labor Party ads saying there'll be coast-to-coast power stations.
In fact, they started using the phrase dangerous.
Scare campaign of them all. The world is going to end. You couldn't get a bigger scare campaign. But on the power bills, it's perfectly true. If you're going to cut emissions, then your power bills will
double the power bill.
Labor has started using this phrase dangerous global warming and dangerous climate change, so they're already
if you're serious, you have to.
That's true.
I can hear the Labor Party saying, do you want coast-to-coast power stations or coast-to-coast Labor premiers? That would be their response to this threat of Labor premiers.
The fact is that, Andrew, and you make a living out of it and do it well, of dissing this, but politicians have got to accept
telling the truth about it.
The political reality is that the way majority of people out there want to see their politicians tackle it.
Yeah, but no, wrong. They want to see their politicians seem to tackle
Last word on this.
When it actually comes down to something effective like doubling the power bills, they don't want it.
Okay, we're going to observations, predictions in a moment, but here's one now from Lee Sales, who is the author of the book Detainee, the case of David Hicks.
It dawned on me the other day that since Hicks's guilty plea, I've been able to finish a book. MUP has edited and indexed it. Thousands of copies have been printed. It's been distributed to warehouses around the country, trucked to bookstores. Booksellers have unpacked it. It's on the shelves. It's now on sale. Meanwhile, David Hicks is still sitting at Guantanamo Bay because the Pentagon hasn't been able to sign a couple of bits of paper and pop him on a plane home. It says it all, really, about this case.
When is he coming home?
We don't know yet. We don't know.
Okay, final observation.
27th of May is the 40th anniversary of the referendum that allowed Indigenous people finally to be counted in the census. The focus of that is going to be the life expectancy gap that still exists. 17 years earlier they died than the rest of the country. Not just the government's responsibility, this is everyone's responsibility.
And reports this morning the government is going to spend money in the budget on Aboriginal housing to allow them to own their own homes.
In
no
your
price.
interview today, Wayne Swan almost said that childcare rebates aren't real, but he didn't say it, and I don't think he will.
Neither do I. Andrew?
Well, I think you're right. There will be something on the greenhouse.
There'll be lots.
But I don't think it will be that much. And the Liberal Party strategy has been to do things that would make sense anyway. I think the solar panels, about it.
Every time he mentions
effective.
climate change, I'm going to
Nothing
think of you at the
effective.
budget
I think
night.
Peter Costello will mention it with or without John Howe's permission. That's it for this week. The 7:30 report, by the way, will have a special extended 90-minute budget wrap on Tuesday night, starting, of course, with the Treasurer's speech. But more immediately, I'll be back with Offsiders at 10:30, and now coming up next, Alan Kohler and Inside Business.